So major breaking news. Théo Pourchaire will no longer drive for Arrow McLaren in IndyCar. His contract is out the door, and in comes Nolan Siegel, who was the hero of Bump Day this year at the Indianapolis 500 and is just coming off a victory in LMP2 at the 24 Hours of Le Mans. For the remainder of the year, as you can see in this tweet, Nolan Siegel has signed a multi-year contract with Arrow McLaren. A shocker, I would say, at least at this point in the year. Now, we'll certainly talk about the whys and hows that Nolan Siegel was on McLaren's radar. You may know some of them if you were paying attention during the month of May at Indianapolis, and even if you were paying attention to who he's been driving for in the World Endurance Championship, because a lot of puzzle pieces make sense for this move when you can kind of piece them together. I think the shocking part of all of this is that the Formula 2 champion and a driver who has been so highly touted in the paddock, not only just the paddock, not only just with the fan base, but within his own team, Théo Pourchaire, who by all accounts has done everything right, has made his team adore him, and the team meaning the folks who are working on his car week in, week out. He has earned respect from everyone but some folks who love Agustin Canapino on the internet. I'm going to refrain from saying Argentinians because I do agree with the criticism that a blanket statement that it's only Argentinians sending hate, I think is wrong. So I'm going to say I'm not going to do that anymore. And I'll just say folks who support Agustin Canapino perhaps a little too strongly on the internet sent hate his way. The Arrow McLaren team, across the board, support for Théo Pourchaire. And he only got one event more. This is a shocker, but maybe it's not, because there have been a lot of driver moves like this, and we'll go over the history of the number 6 car at McLaren in this video and the tumultuous history of that, particularly in the last 12 months, because this has been one of the oddest and craziest shuffling of drivers that I've seen in many a year for a car and a seat and a team that is as high a caliber as this. And I guess we'll talk about the merits of doing that as much as they are. Although, again, on paper, there's a commitment here to Nolan Siegel, but there was also a commitment to Théo Pourchaire. So much so that while this tweet has been deleted now, I can confirm that it was on his Twitter, and archiving it is our pal and DL500 member, thank you, to all the DL500 club members out there, NASCAR man, who archived this tweet from only a day ago from Théo Pourchaire that says, "Man, I can't believe I'm going to race at the legendary Laguna Seca this weekend. Can't wait to be there for the Grand Prix of Monterey." Now, this could have been a political tweet, for sure, to set the expectation that he's going to be there, with him knowing that he wasn't going to be there. Sure, I could believe that, but I have a suspicion that Théo Pourchaire believed that he was going to be racing in Laguna Seca this weekend, and this decision was made very late. And this comes on the heels. I mean, it was not that long ago. I was there. This was announced in the month of May. Théo Pourchaire, Arrow McLaren confirms that Théo Pourchaire, for the remainder of the 2024 NTT IndyCar Series season, absent the Indy 500. That was from May 9th, 2024. I believe that was the day before all of the stuff for the Grand Prix of Indianapolis kicked off. And we are just over a month and 9 days from the time that this announcement was made to the point where Théo Pourchaire is no longer driving for Arrow McLaren. And when this came across my desk this morning, I had a couple of questions, right? The first thing I asked was, okay, Nolan's in. who's he replacing? When the answer was Théo Pourchaire, I said, okay, is McLaren trying to hang on to Théo Pourchaire? Because at least Alexander Rossi is in a contract year with them. There's questions about whether or not he will be staying. There's all sorts of question marks about the Arrow McLaren team. So I said, maybe Nolan Siegel's coming in to warm this seat, and then maybe Théo and Nolan will be driving for the team next year. But that is not the case. Théo Pourchaire is totally out. In fact, I believe it was Racer.com, Marshall Pruitt writing the article, that said that Théo has already been contacted by 3 other IndyCar teams for his services. Now, exactly who those are or when those contracts may be signed, sealed, and delivered, we have yet to find out. I wouldn't be surprised in the least bit if one of those teams was Chip Ganassi Racing, considering the pettiness of those two organizations over the last couple of years. It's been a wild ride between Arrow McLaren and Chip Ganassi Racing. So there's a whole lot of things to talk about here, and I don't even know where to begin. I've written some notes, and we're just going to start rolling. So we'll talk about Nolan Siegel first. So a few details to go over. He is no longer competing in the Indy Next by Firestone series. He is done in that series for the remainder of the year. His replacement is Christian Brooks, who will do double duty in USF or Indy Pro 2000. So you have double duty for Christian Brooks. He's going to finish up the Indy Next by Firestone series with hopes of getting into that series next year. And by the way, the TV deal, I was working a go-kart race this weekend. There were several people involved in USF as well as Indy Lights on site at that event. And I can just tell you from what I heard from those people, they are very excited about that TV deal because they think they can sell actual sponsorships now for that series. So the quality of driving in that series might even go further up next year. Great for the feeder series, great for the ladder system. But Christian Brooks is in for the rest of the season in Indy Next. Nolan Siegel had been rumored, in fact, that he was going to finish the season starting in Road America. Now, what's very interesting about how this all has gone down is, if you will remember, Agustin Canapino stepped away for whatever reason. They claimed it was a mental health break. There was, I believe it was an article from motorsport.com. The author, I believe, was Joey Barnes. That was an exclusive interview with Brad Hollinger that essentially said, look, man, Augustine was looking at too many mean tweets, and we felt like we had to get him out of the car, and they did. And Nolan Siegel literally pulled his Indy Next car into the pits, got out, sacrificed the weekend to jump in to the number 78 Indy car and run at Elkhart Lake. Now, there had been a rumor that was said to me by people who certainly knew what they were talking about. And other people heard this too, that Nolan Siegel potentially could have run the rest of the season for Juncos Hollinger. Now, this is where we get into rumor and speculation territory, so I won't get too far into the weeds. But if that is to be believed, and I believe the people that told me that at least that was a possibility, and considering the McLaren Juncos split that happened the same weekend involving Théo Pourchaire and Agustin Canapino, one of those drivers is not returning to Laguna Seca, and one of them is. And who would have bet on Agustin Canapino being the one of the two that would be racing in Laguna Seca last week? I wouldn't have bet on that. I wouldn't have bet on that one single bit. But this is the reality we're living in. But suffice it to say, Nolan Siegel finishing the season now. I hate to harp on this point, but I suppose I will. What kind of a contract did Théo Pourchaire sign with McLaren? And is there any recourse that he could have for this sudden loss of his seat? Because, quite frankly, while Théo didn't set the world on fire, he didn't have enough races to really judge him to a point where I think he would have had any kind of a performance clause in his contract to get rid of him. So did he not actually sign a full season deal with Arrow McLaren in May? Was that just announced? Was it actually a race-by-race deal? And if he does have a contract, what does that mean going forward for Théo Pourchaire? I suppose the other question, logical explanation could be, did Nolan and his backers buy out Teo's contract? That's a possibility too. Although, again, we won't know until any potential legal filings would be filed. But I have a lot of questions about the contractual situation and what actually went down to get Nolan Siegel into the seat and Théo Pourchaire out of the seat. Now, with Nolan Siegel, I mentioned his victory in the LMP2 class at the 24 Hours of Le Mans just 2 days ago, by the way. Nolan Siegel drives for United Autosport in the World Endurance Championship. And that particular car, United Autosports, the team, is partially owned by Zach Brown. Now, that's not totally indicative of who made the decision on Nolan Siegel. And ultimately, of course, Zach did have to sign off on that, right? He's the owner of the team, after all, or the team principal, I guess we'll say. And he's obviously on McLaren's radar because he drives for Zach in sports cars, although not under the McLaren badge as of yet. Tony Kanaan is the first person in Papaya who really publicly stood behind Nolan Siegel. If you'll remember back to Bump Day at the Indianapolis 500, who was on the pit box offering support to Nolan Siegel? Tony Kanaan. He did so in his McLaren uniform, very publicly, talked to NBC live that he believed in Nolan Siegel and thought the world of him at the time. So I would not be surprised to find out that this was very much a Tony Kanaan decision. Now, what Tony Kanaan didn't see in Théo Pourchaire versus what he sees in Nolan Siegel, not sure yet. I think Nolan Siegel is certainly deserving of this opportunity. Don't get that twisted. I think Nolan's going to perform very well if he's given the opportunity to perform well, of course. I just feel that Théo Pourchaire wasn't given the opportunity. He didn't have enough races, simply put. And he had a fantastic race at Long Beach. Least we forget, it wasn't that long ago. It was not that long ago that Théo Pourchaire was impressing everybody. It's very surprising. I suppose another thing to bring up is I won't say the fact, but you might have seen on Twitter Tony Donahue bring up that there's a possibility that Arrow could leave McLaren at the end of this year. That has been long rumored. I think I first heard about that in the winter of this year. I think it's a possibility, but I'm not prepared to say that that's something that's 100% going to happen. And McLaren is one of the most sponsorship flush teams in the sport, right? And they certainly have the pitch deck to be able to bring sponsorship back into the team for sure. I think the one thing to consider, though, is that Nolan Siegel potentially does bring money into the situation. His parents are very well off. That's, par for the course for a lot of drivers coming up through the ladder system these days. And again, until we know the specific details of the contract, or if anybody actually speaks on that, is Nolan bringing money to the team? I wouldn't totally throw out the possibility. And if a big sponsor is indeed leaving McLaren, which certainly is not factual at this time, but it's certainly something that has been spoken about in hushed tones in the paddock for the last 8 months, I think that's a possibility too, that there is an incentive not only from a driving talent standpoint, but also from a monetary standpoint. The 6-car situation has been absolutely crazy. And I think some people will draw, when I mention cash, some people will probably draw comparisons to David Malukas. But I can tell you this, David Malukas didn't bring a dime to Arrow McLaren. That was a paid seat for David Malukas. He was paid to be there. Although, of course, he only ran, I believe, one test for Arrow McLaren. That was a fall hybrid test. So really never drove the car, obviously got injured, and now is finishing the season for Meyer Shank Racing. Least we forget Felix Rosenquist and the contract limbo he was in for 2 years. Then you had Callum Ilott, who raced for them at the Indianapolis 500 and filled in for them at the Indy 500 test in April. And of course, Théo Pourchaire jumped into the car after Callum took the first start of the season at St. Pete. It's amazing to see. And of course, there's a long list of drivers, if you go even further back, that have been in and out of the 6 car over the years. And now Nolan Siegel is the next driver on that list. I think he will do well. Don't get me wrong. Don't get it twisted. I'll say that again. I think Nolan Siegel will do very well. I think he's going to take this opportunity. I'll say it. I trust Tony Kanaan's driver talent ability, right? Driver talent, scouting ability. I trust Tony Kanaan when he says that this is going to be something, when he backs a guy and is prepared to put him in a seat on the team, ready to go. It's a bad situation for Théo Pourchaire, but I think there are seats that would be available to him should he want to continue in IndyCar, and I hope he does, because I do think he's got a future as well. Certainly going to be a difficult PR day in the land of Arrow McLaren. It's, I feel like they're used to it at this point, unfortunately, but it's certainly, they're certainly not doing themselves any favors with announcements like this. And the turbulent nature of bringing drivers in and out of the team, if you're looking for performance, at some point you're going to have to commit to 3 drivers and stick with them for 2 or 3 or 4 years. It's no surprise to me that Pato O'Ward is the most consistent performer on that team because he's been with them since 2020. It just makes a lot of sense. So hopefully Nolan has a long and prosperous career with Arrow McLaren, and they stick with this decision. And I suppose that's my thoughts on it so far. I'm sure you guys have already let me know your thoughts down in the comments section below. Yet another shocker out of the IndyCar mid-season silly season. And we probably shouldn't be surprised or shocked that it involves Arrow McLaren. But alas, I'm a little bit shocked. We'll see you in the next video.